Karl Breen's name was once spoken in fearful whispers on the streets of West Dublin. He rose to prominence as the leader of a ruthless drug-dealing gang known as the Infamous D22, a crew that terrorized people in West Dublin with violence and intimidation. Breen was more than a local thug. He became one of the most dangerous criminals in the city, according to Irish newspapers. Under his command, the D22 gang built a heroin empire and was linked to at least 3 gangland murders in the capital during its peak years. From the start, Breen showed a willingness to use extreme tactics to maintain power. His gang recruited dozens of young, impressionable teenagers as foot soldiers, juveniles who would carry drugs and guns for the gang and do its dirty work. These teenage recruits had an almost irrational loyalty to Breen, ready to take the fall for him if needed. In one case, in 2009, police caught a 15-year-old boy hiding a shotgun for the gang. He wore surgical gloves and had been promised he'd get lenient treatment as a minor if caught. Such was the reach of Karl Breen's influence. Even kids became pawns in his criminal enterprise. By the mid-2000s, Breen's power in Clondalkin, a district in Dublin's postal code 22, was at its height. He had already amassed a string of criminal convictions in his youth, 18 previous convictions by 2006, mostly for petty offences like public disorder and traffic violations. These were early signs of the path he had chosen. Police drug units had been watching him for some time, suspecting his involvement in bigger crimes. Breen loved the notoriety that came with being a gang boss. He reveled in the fear he instilled and the wealth that flowed from the drug trade. But as his reputation grew on the streets, so did the danger surrounding him, and it wouldn't be long before a single violent night changed everything. Yet even as Karl Breen enjoyed his reign, a fateful celebration was looming, one that would turn a party into a night of bloodshed.
On New Year's Eve 2005, Karl Breen joined a group of friends and their partners at Jury's Croke Park Hotel in Dublin to ring in 2006. What began as a festive celebration with loved ones quickly turned into horror. The group of 5 couples indulged in a luxurious spree, ordering 5 bottles of Moët in Chandon champagne for the occasion. There was heavy drinking, and later evidence would reveal cocaine use as well. As midnight passed, the joyful atmosphere soured into tension. An argument erupted between Breen and his close friend, 21-year-old Martin McLaughlin. No one had planned for violence that night, but Karl Breen was about to do the unthinkable. In the heat of the moment, Breen produced a knife. Amidst the shouting and chaos in that hotel room, he lunged at McLaughlin. Breen stabbed his friend 3 times during the altercation. The brutal attack shocked everyone present. Moments earlier, the 2 men had been seen hugging and celebrating together on CCTV footage from the hotel, underlining how suddenly the night turned violent. Now McLaughlin lay bleeding from multiple wounds. The injured man was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was fatal. Martin McLaughlin died of his injuries the very next day. A night of revelry had turned into a nightmare of bloodshed. When the reality of what he had done set in, Breen didn't wait around. In the immediate aftermath of the stabbing, as his mortally wounded friend was taken away, Karl Breen fled the scene. Panicked and full of adrenaline, he went on the run. For 2 days, Breen disappeared, evading the police and anyone who might hold him accountable. This sudden act of violence would soon earn him a notorious nickname in the press, the Champagne Killer, so called because of the champagne-fueled celebration that preceded the crime. Karl Breen had killed his friend in a drunken rage, and now the law was coming for him. The police manhunt was underway, and Karl Breen could not hide forever. The stage was set for a high-profile trial that would reveal the true brutality of his actions.
After 2 days as a fugitive, Karl Breen surrendered himself to the Gardaí, the Irish police. He was arrested and charged with the killing of Martin McLoughlin. The case went to trial in late 2007, and Dublin's media and gangland figures alike watched closely. Breen pleaded not guilty to murder, insisting he never intended to kill his friend. Instead, he admitted to the stabbing, but argued it was not premeditated. In the courtroom, details of that New Year's party emerged: the extravagant champagne, the drug use, and the sudden burst of violence. Breen even told the court, "I killed him, I did not murder him," trying to convince the jury it was an impulsive act rather than an intentional homicide. The trial atmosphere was thick with intimidation and fear. While Breen sat in custody, his associates on the outside launched a campaign to protect their boss. Witnesses who knew the truth about that night were threatened at every turn. A key witness received death threats and was warned he'd be murdered if he testified. Strangers delivered ominous messages, and anonymous notes promised violent retribution to anyone who spoke against Breen. The intimidation escalated. Gunmen shot at the witness's home in Clondalkin multiple times as a warning. Graffiti appeared on local walls, insulting and threatening the witness. Public warnings sprayed in paint for all to see. The pressure was so intense that this witness ultimately fled Ireland, escaping to Spain in fear for his life. Such tactics showed how dangerous Breen's gang remained, even with their leader behind bars awaiting trial. Despite these attempts to derail justice, the trial moved forward. The evidence was overwhelming. Other partygoers testified about the drunken fight and the stabbing. The hotel CCTV showing Breen and McLoughlin embracing earlier that night underscored the tragedy of the incident. In October 2007, the verdict was delivered. The jury found Karl Breen guilty of manslaughter, a lesser charge than murder, acknowledging that he hadn't planned the killing but was still responsible for McLaughlin's death. The judge noted that a lot of alcohol had been consumed and that no one began the night intending to commit a crime, but he also pointed out that Breen was not of blameless character. Indeed, Breen's criminal record and violent reputation loomed large. For taking his friend's life, Karl Breen was sentenced to 9 years in prison. As Breen was led away in handcuffs, the so-called Champagne Killer was headed to a cell. He had escaped a murder conviction and a potential life sentence, but he could not escape justice entirely. The gang boss would spend the next chapter of his life behind bars. However, even as he began serving time, the violent reach of his gang was far from over. With their leader locked up, the infamous D22 gang was about to face new battles on the streets, battles that would claim more lives and test loyalties like never before. Karl Breen's imprisonment left a power vacuum in Dublin's underworld. The infamous D22 gang, now without its leader on the streets, soon found itself in a bitter feud with a rival criminal faction. This rival crew was another group of young and ruthless thugs from the Clondalkin area, reportedly aligned with a veteran armed robber named Thomas Freeman. What ensued was a vicious tit-for-tat war that spilled blood in the community and terrorized innocent families. The violence escalated quickly. Breen's gang still operated under his name, and they were not about to back down. But in August 2009, tragedy struck the D22 crew.
Breen's chief enforcer, 24-year-old Pierce Reed, was ambushed and shot dead outside his home in Clondalkin. It was a cold, calculated hit, likely orchestrated by the rival gang to send a message. Pierce Reed had been one of Breen's most loyal lieutenants, keeping the enterprise running while Breen was in prison. His murder was a major blow to the D22 gang's strength and morale. Reed's killing set off an eruption of retribution. In the immediate aftermath, tensions reached a boiling point. Gunmen opened fire on the home of an innocent family in Clondalkin, riddling the house with bullets in a mistaken attempt at revenge. Not long after, another unsuspecting family's house was firebombed with a pipe bomb, again a case of mistaken identity. The community was living in fear as these criminals settled scores with total disregard for civilian lives. The name D22, which once instilled fear, now drew public outrage for the collateral damage in this gang war. The rivals answered with a cruel act of disrespect. As mourners prepared for Pierce Reed's funeral, they awoke to find graffiti splashed across the roof of the local church where the service would be held. In large letters, the rival gang painted D22 infamous rats on the church rooftop, mocking Breen's crew even as they grieved. The sight shocked the neighborhood and showed how deeply the hatred ran between these gangs. Behind bars, Karl Breen could only watch as his empire fractured. Sources say that Reed's murder further weakened his boss's influence in Dublin's underworld. With key members dead and others too frightened or jailed, the infamous D22 gang was losing its grip. Younger gangs were rising to fill the void. By the time Breen would walk free, the criminal landscape of his home turf had changed dramatically, and not in his favor. The gang war had taken its toll. Karl Breen's power on the outside was waning, even before he stepped out of prison. But inside those prison walls, Breen was not ready to relinquish control or his violent ways.
Life in prison did little to tame Karl Breen's brutality. In fact, he continued to show why he had earned his deadly reputation. Early in his sentence, Breen still tried to keep a grip on his criminal operations from within. He was twice caught with mobile phones in jail as he attempted to direct his gang's activities from behind bars. Prison authorities saw him as far from a model inmate. He was an agitator who still thought of himself as a boss. Breen's aggressions surfaced in violent incidents while incarcerated. In November 2011, he was involved in a savage attack on a female prison officer and another guard in the Midlands prison. Even locked up, Breen showed no hesitation in lashing out at authority figures. This assault led to disciplinary action by prison authorities. Other brawls and skirmishes behind bars further proved that Karl Breen was as dangerous inside prison as he was outside. During these years, Breen also faced legal issues beyond the murder case. He had previously been implicated in organizing illegal dogfights, a brutal blood sport where pit bull terriers were forced to fight each other while men placed bets. Back in 2003, police had busted an illegal dogfighting event, and Breen was tied to the incident. He was convicted for his role, though he later managed to get that conviction overturned on appeal. The dogfighting episode was another glimpse into Breen's ruthless world. Whether it was humans or animals, violence was a constant theme in his life. As the years in prison passed, Karl Breen's clout on the outside continued to erode. His gang was splintering, and rival factions had taken over much of the drug trade in Clondalkin. Still, Breen held out hope of regaining his throne once he got out.
He served about 7 years of his 9-year sentence behind bars, benefiting from standard remission for good behavior. By late 2014, the Champagne Killer was a free man again. But the world he returned to was not the one he had left. Karl Breen stepped out of prison weakened and distrustful. The final act of his life was about to begin, marked by fear, isolation, and the specter of his violent past looming over him. In October 2014, Karl Breen emerged from prison, a free man, at age 34. He had expected to step back into his old life, but freedom did not bring the triumph he hoped for. In his absence, the Dublin crime scene had moved on. Breen struggled to re-establish himself as a leading crime figure in the capital. Many of his former allies wanted nothing to do with him now. He had fallen out with many key members of the underworld, leaving him isolated. The infamous D22 gang was effectively broken, and younger, more ruthless players had taken over the streets. Breen found himself adrift and increasingly paranoid. He spent much of his time away from Dublin's glare, lying low in hotels and rented apartments under false names. He even mingled with low-level criminals from outside the city, small-time thugs from Athlone, County Westmeath, whom he had met in prison. For a man who once commanded armies of gangland foot soldiers, it was a humbling and suspicious existence. The police had not forgotten Karl Breen, and neither had his enemies. Upon his release, Gardaí warned Breen that his life was under threat from other criminals. This only fed Breen's mounting paranoia. He began to see danger everywhere. In the final weeks of his life, Breen barricaded himself inside his apartment, obsessively fortifying his hideout against any attack. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, expecting a hitman's bullet at any moment. Despite living in fear, Karl Breen couldn't resist taunting his foes from the shadows. He periodically posted pictures of himself on Facebook, gesturing defiantly, as if to mock the Gardaí or his rivals. In one furious Facebook rant, Breen unleashed profanity at the media for writing about him and even made outrageous accusations against the police. He claimed Gardaí had once tried to kill him and make it look like an accident, insisting only a witness's presence stopped them. He also vowed never to reveal his address to police, suggesting they would set him up to be murdered by gangland enemies. These statements revealed the state of mind Breen exhibited: angry, desperate, and deeply distrustful of everyone. Through late 2014 and into January 2015, Karl Breen lived like a ghost, surfacing only occasionally and never staying in one place for long. He kept his whereabouts secret. The only people who knew where he lived at any given time were close family members, whom he stayed in regular contact with. He spoke to his sister often, one of the few people he still trusted. But as the weeks passed, even his family noticed his growing anxiety. He became increasingly erratic and hard to reach. They feared that the pressures of his past were catching up to him. At the start of February 2015, those fears proved tragically well-founded. Karl Breen's final paranoid days were about to come to an abrupt and lonely end.
On a cold evening in early February 2015, silence fell over an apartment in the Tolka complex on Dublin's Finglas Road. Inside, behind a barricaded door, lay the lifeless body of Karl Breen. The once feared gang boss had met a quiet end.
Breen's sister and her partner discovered his corpse around 11 p.m. on February 2, 2015, after they broke into the apartment when he failed to answer calls or the door. They had grown alarmed when they hadn't heard from him all day. They forced their way in through a shattered window, and their worst fears were confirmed. The scene was grim but strangely peaceful. There were no signs of struggle, no assailants lying in wait. The 34-year-old Karl Breen was dead from an apparent drugs overdose. Paramedics and police arrived in the early hours of the morning, but there was nothing to be done. Investigators found prescription tablets scattered in the apartment, indicating that Breen had likely ingested a lethal amount of drugs on his own. Forensic examiners noted that there was no evidence of foul play. In the end, the man who survived gang wars and prison fell to drugs. News of Breen's death quickly spread through Dublin. Many were stunned that this notorious underworld figure had died so unceremoniously. Some had expected Karl Breen to go out in a blaze of violence, perhaps gunned down by a rival, given the numerous threats on his life. Instead, the Champagne killer died alone in a quiet apartment. Karl Breen's story is a cautionary tale of power, violence, and downfall. He rose from petty crimes to become a gangland kingpin who ruled through fear. His nickname, the Champagne Killer, embodied the dark irony of his life, luxury and violence intertwined. He reveled in infamy, but that infamy made him a target for his enemies. In the end, Breen could not escape the consequences of the world he lived in. Isolated and paranoid, he succumbed not to a rival's bullet, but to a fatal dose of drugs. His death brought a mixture of relief and reflection to Dublin. Relief that a dangerous man was gone, and a sobering look at how a young man from Clondalkin became one of Ireland's most feared gangsters. The life and death of Karl Breen stand as a dramatic reminder that the gangster path often leads only to two places, prison or the grave, and Karl Breen ended up in both.